Howdy y'all, I'm Dr. Jarvis and I want to share with you a video that I just did for the Fort Worth Fire Department. This video is about the use of MCDs or mechanical compression devices, or the LUCAS or LUCI. And I want y'all to see this because this impacts how we're using the mechanical compression device in resuscitation and cardiac arrest with the city of Fort Worth. You're going to start seeing some changes, namely that you'll see 2 engines show up on cardiac arrest within Fort Worth, and you will see them delaying the application of the LUCAS device. I wanted to explain why we're doing that and give you an understanding of what the science behind that recommendation is. The one additional thing I want y'all to know is how this interacts with our eCPR program, our ECMO pilot. So the evidence about ECMO is still mixed. It certainly looks like ECMO is helpful, but the questions that surround it are who to do ECMO on and when to transport. That part of the science is not fully baked in yet. So the way that we will do this is go through all other inclusion criteria. If they meet those, and you have done your initial rounds of CPR, secured an advanced airway, made sure they meet the inclusion criteria, given epinephrine, done the shocks, and given amiodarone, you're pretty close to 15 minutes there already. I would like you to go ahead and wait until 15 minutes, then apply the mechanical compression device. Once that's in place and all other criteria are met, for the eCPR protocol to go ahead and transport to one of the eCPR facilities. The video doesn't talk about that. It really talks about the science of delayed application of the LUCAS. Thanks a lot, y'all, and have a great night. Howdy, y'all. I'm Dr. Jeff Jarvis, and I want to give a little context to the reason that I think we need to change our approach to cardiac arrest management. Specifically, the training y'all have been going through focuses on sending not 1 but 2 engines to every cardiac arrest and delaying the implementation of the mechanical compression device, the MCD. Well, I want to give you some rationale for why I want to do that. Now, I'm a big believer in bottom line upfront, so I'm going to give you my key takeaways, and then I'm going to share with you some of the science behind why I think these things are in the best interest of our patients. So the first thing to understand is that the key to resuscitation, the most vital part of resuscitation, are the basics. Basic resuscitation is what improves survival from cardiac arrest. I want us to focus on those, get those really, really well choreographed. And when we do that, I think that will improve survival. There are a couple of points about this that I think is important. Number one, the more resources we bring to a cardiac arrest, the better the survival. And I'll share the paper that shows that. The other thing is we need to focus our efforts on getting pulses back on scene before we transport, because what we know about that is resuscitation on scene is associated with better survival than rapid transport to the hospital, or for that matter, transport without pulses at all. And this applies to both adults and pediatrics. Next up, the most important part of the code is the first 10 to 15 minutes. Now, the reason for that is that 90% of those who are going to survive will get pulses back in that first 10 to 15 minutes. Now, that doesn't mean that if you get pulses back 30 minutes into the code that you won't ultimately survive. It just means the odds are way better if you get pulses back early. And that is intrinsically common sense. I think we probably all know that. But when you think about the science behind that, the fact that that is absolutely demonstrable, then you say, well, we need to focus our efforts on that first 10 to 15 minutes. So when I say focus our efforts, what do I mean by that? I mean, we need to focus on what matters. And what matters is the basics of resuscitation. Good, minimally interrupted, high quality chest compressions and early defibrillation. Those are the things that improve survival. Anything that distracts us from that is bad. Now, one of the things that can distract us from that, and as a matter of fact, I think does, is a mechanical compression device. MCD is an incredibly effective attention grabbing device. So we've seen this repeatedly that when the MCD comes into the room, our attention leaves doing high quality compressions and it moves to the Lucas because the assumption is that the Lucas or the MCD is going to do better compressions than we can, and that's what is important to the patient. Unfortunately, that's not accurate, and the science doesn't bear it out. So the thing that I want you to hear, though, is that I don't dislike the MCD. I have no problem with the Lucas. I just don't want to use it all the time as early as possible. I want to use it when it makes sense to use it. So just like I'm a big fan of defibrillation or Narcan, I'm not going to defibrillate every patient. I'm not going to give Narcan to every patient. Just like any clinical intervention, I'm going to use it for those patients that can benefit from it, and I'm not going to use it in those patients that can't, and I'm certainly not going to use it in those patients where I think it might do harm. So I think we need to use them, but we need to be smart about it and focus them when and for whom they can make the most difference. Now, I think we probably need to just get this out of the way early. There have been a lot of studies done on mechanical compression devices, both the Lucas and the Autopulse. No benefit to patients. Again, no benefit to patients, and I'm going to run through that literature with you in a second. Now, early on in the resuscitation, I think the Lucas is harmful. Later in the resuscitation, I think the Lucas is beneficial. Certainly, if we're going to transport the patient, the Lucas is definitely beneficial. It just may not be beneficial to the patient. It may be beneficial to us. And I'm a big believer that one of my highest responsibilities is doing everything I can to get you home from your shift safely. Getting involved in a collision, it's not high on my list of priorities for you. I want you to be able to be restrained in the back of an ambulance. That's what a Lucas is very good for. So, when do I think using a Lucas makes sense? I think it makes most sense to do well choreographed pit crew CPR for the first 10 to 15 minutes, then implement the MCD in the phased process that we've already discussed. Backboard first, then apply it. Make sure you have the neck strap on, avoid MCD walk, all of the things that we've trained for. We just need to do it after that first phase of the resuscitation is done. And then definitely I want us using it before we transport a patient. The other time I think a Lucas can be useful is if we don't have enough resources to adequately work the resuscitation. For whatever reason, if we have very few people on scene, then an MCD may make way more sense early on. Now, one of the advantages of sending 2 engines is you also get 2 officers. And I would like to dedicate one of those officers to dealing with the other patient in the room, and that is the family member or members. We know how most resuscitations are going to end up. I think we need to go ahead and plan for things up front. Talk to the family, let them know what's going on, keep them aware, have one person dedicated to be the liaison with that family. That allows you to establish a rapport with the family, and it allows the family to stay up to date, understand all of the scary things that are going on. And then if we do need to do a termination of resuscitation, you have already developed the rapport with the patient. You can break that bad news a little bit more comfortably. It's still going to be a horrible day for them, but anything we can do to give them a little bit of comfort, I think will help. The patients or the family members of patients in cardiac arrest who have gone through this and have had a dedicated family liaison, they just really say it makes a big difference. So don't forget the family. Now let's talk a little bit about the science here. So the first thing I want you to understand is if we don't get pulses on scene, the odds of survival are dismal. Two papers on this. One is from a combined data set from the San Antonio Fire Department and the Cincinnati Fire Department. What they found is if you don't get pulses back on scene, the odds of survival in those patients who didn't have pulses, 0.7%. That's 0.7% of patients transported without pulses ended up surviving. There was also a paper done in a large Japanese registry. They found 0.5% of patients transported without pulses survived. Abysmal rate of survival if we don't get ROSC first. Next, those agencies that transport without pulses more often have lower survival. There was a very nice study that looked at a really large data set of patients, and they looked at the survival rate and the proportion of patients they transported without pulses for each agency. And what they found is a 40% decrease in the odds of neurologically intact survival for those patients, those agencies that load and go. So if we value neurologically intact survival, and I know we do, we need to work the patient to conclusion on scene. Now, there are some potential exceptions to that, and pregnancy, I think, is an obvious exception. And then ECMO. And the truth is we don't really understand a lot about ECMO. We're still trying to identify the right patient population, but for the majority of patients, 40% decrease in the odds of meaningful survival if we load and go. We don't want to do that. Now, I said that most people who survive cardiac arrest, neurologically intact, get pulses back within the first 10 to 15 minutes. This is really important. There are several papers that tell us this. I'm going to throw up a graph here, and what this is showing is the association between duration of resuscitation and probability of survival. So what we've done is we've taken all patients who ultimately survived, and we plot when they got pulses back. So for example, for those patients who are neurologically intact, that means an MRS or modified Rankin score of 0 to 3. That's a way of measuring neurologically intact survival. For those patients who were neurologically intact, 50% of survivals got pulses back in the first 6 minutes. 75% of patients who survived neurologically intact got pulses back within 10 minutes. 90% of them got pulses back within the first 16 minutes. There are several additional papers that tell us exactly the same thing. Now, let's get to mechanical compressions. I just want to go over very, very quickly several of the key studies that tell us this. When we talk about survival with a mechanical compression device, I want to be very careful that I am talking about patient survival, not our survival. I hope you understand. I want a Lucas in place if we're going to transport. So first trial, the LINC trial, LINC trial. This was a manufacturer-supported multi-agency study of the Lucas device compared to manual CPR, no improved survival. The next was the paramedic trial. This was not a manufacturer-supported study, very large study, about 2,000 patients in each arm, Lucas device versus manual CPR, no improvement in survival. And as a matter of fact, they found decreased neurologically intact survival in the Lucas group. Well, what about the Geezer squeezer, the load distributing band, the autopulse? Well, the CIRC trial, CIRC trial, was a multi-center study using the autopulse, no improved survival. And as a matter of fact, they saw decreased ROSC, no improved survival. So there have been 5 or 6 other studies of mechanical compression devices, and the way that we can pull all of those together, pool them up, and redo the numbers, that's something called a systematic review and meta-analysis. There have been 4 of these done. None of them showed survival. As a matter of fact, they have said it is unethical to continue doing these trials because we have studied it so much, we've seen no impact. Stop doing the trials. Okay, well, that's nice. Those are formal randomized control trials. What about real world evidence? What do we see when agencies implement this and carefully study the impact it has? Well, it turns out Austin Travis County EMS did that. So they had a very well choreographed approach to pit crew CPR, and they implemented the MCD with Austin Fire, and they did it in a way where the MCD would migrate from engine to engine. So you ended up with two groups of patients where everything else was essentially the same. Some had a Lucas, some did not. And what they saw when they compared survival between those groups was decreased survival in the patients that had a Lucas. So they decided they were going to do a really intensive quality improvement effort aimed at improving the way they used a Lucas. So they did direct observation about how the Lucas was placed. And they said, well, we're taking too long to put it on. We need to break it up into steps, much like how we apply the MCD. So they were able to shorten the amount of time it took to put the Lucas on. So they did all the things that we've been doing to try to maximize how we use it. After they did all of that, they compared again, going forward, they compared survival between the Lucas group and the manual CPR group. And what they found is overall survival, now this includes patients with VFib and asystole, overall survival in the manual CPR group was 14%. Survival in the Lucas group, though, was 7%, and that was a statistically significant difference. So even after doing all the things to improve the way that you use the Lucas, they saw decreased survival when you were using it. Now, there is another study that went back and looked at that link trial, the original Lucas device trial, and they said we only want to look at those patients most likely to survive. In other words, the patients with VFib or VTAC, the shockable patients that we have the most potential to help. We probably recognize that in the 90-year-old nursing home patient who's been in a systole for 3 to 4 months, no matter what we do, we're probably not going to help them. But in this group, the ones with a shockable rhythm, the ones we're most likely to help, they wanted to see what the impact of a Lucas was. Now, overall, they still saw no benefit, but they did see something that was interesting. If you look at the patients who got ROSC early, within the first 10 minutes, they saw an advantage to manual CPR. Survival in the manual CPR 25% versus 14% in the Lucas. So what they saw is in the group that got pulses early, the ones that are most likely to have meaningful survival, lower survival with the mechanical compression device. Well, that's not good, and that is the reason I don't want to use it early. But then what about the patients that got pulses back after 10 minutes? Well, in that group, they saw that there was an advantage to using mechanical compression. 2 times the survival rate, 30% versus 15% with manual CPR. So what is the takeaway about that? Early on in the arrest with good high-quality CPR is the most important, when early defib is the most important, when distractions, when interruptions are most harmful, manual CPR is associated with higher survival. But good high-quality CPR is really, really hard to maintain, no matter how many resources you have on scene. It's just hard, and the quality of compressions is going to decrease. And at around the 10 to 15 minute mark, mechanical CPR makes sense. That's the reason I want to delay the implementation of MCD. Not take it away, just use it when it has a higher likelihood of benefit. All right, so to sum up what I think, again, the basics of resuscitation, good manual CPR, early defib, that is the hallmark, that is the key to good resuscitation outcomes. Resuscitate on scene for better outcomes. Remember, 40% decrease in the odds of meaningful survival if we load and go. Survival, if we don't get pulses on scene, almost non-existent, well under 1%. 90% of people who are going to survive are going to get pulses back in the first 10 to 15 minutes. That's where we need to focus our efforts. Let's use the MCDs in ways that make our job safer, protect us, but don't detract from the care of our patients. So use them in a delayed fashion, not an early fashion. Guys, I hope this has been helpful. I hope this gives you an understanding of why I think we need to delay implementation of the Lucas device. So this is my City of Fort Worth email address. You can always get me at that address. And this is my personal cell phone number. Feel free to reach out, text me, email me, call me. If you have any questions, please let me know. I love talking about this stuff, and I'd really, really be happy to answer any questions you have. Guys, take care, be safe. Thank you very much.